the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the preservation of information. In the modern world, we stand on the shoulders of giants, wielding technology beyond anything imaginable to our ancestors. We are so steeped within these gifts that we grow numb to their presence, and if dropped into the wilderness without these tools, most of us could not construct a functioning community, let alone rebuild everything that we have today. Because everyone who was alive to create our fortune is currently unavailable for questioning, we will instead have to turn to what those people left behind in their wake. While stone and marble do not rot or fall apart when left alone, and there remains ancient pottery, buildings, and statues for our study, they can only show us what could remain and withstand thousands of years of existence in the same form without any maintenance. They do not give us a complete picture of those people's lives. Another way to look at the lifestyles of those in our past is through the words that they have written down. The closest spot to these origins now lie within the greatest biblical archaeological discovery of the 20th century. Off the coast of the Dead Sea, 3 shepherds discovered a cave full of pots containing scrolls of ancient Hebrew text. These all would later be confirmed to be the oldest manuscript copies of the Old Testament. Independent of any of our faiths or beliefs, these books are foundational to the structure of the Western world, and any potential insights into its origins deserve attention. The Dead Sea itself is a big, dead, salty lake in the Jordan Rift Valley, bordering Israel and Jordan. The climate surrounding the Dead Sea is extremely hot and arid, with an average year-round temperature of 79 degrees Fahrenheit and an average precipitation of only 1.65 inches of rainfall. No multicellular life can live in its waters, nor in the surrounding salty soil. With very few people or animals around to disturb the hidden scrolls, what the Dead Sea provided was nearly perfect opportunity for the preservation of papyrus and parchment manuscripts. The archaeological site on the Dead Sea that contains these caves is called Qumran, and it is widely speculated to be the location of a mystic Jewish sect that operated during the antiquity. Close to these caves are the remains of a settlement, believed to be the home of those who originally hid these scrolls. After lying undisturbed for 2,000 years, these scrolls were discovered by mere accident. While 3 Bedouin shepherds were searching the area for a lost member of their flock, they amused themselves throwing rocks from a distance into the surrounding caves. It was when they heard the sound of breaking clay in one of these caves that the youngest of the shepherds traveled out later that night to search the area. They found a whole set of old and incomprehensible texts that they brought back to their camp. Not knowing the value of what they had found, the Bedouins sold these scrolls to antique dealers in Bethlehem in the spring of 1947 for a sum of what would today be about $350. When the news of this discovery broke to the public, treasure hunters flocked to these caves along the Dead Sea. In total, a dozen caves were found containing Jewish artifacts, and in all, portions of every single book of the Hebrew Bible, sans the book of Esther, alongside many apocryphal and extra-biblical works, were found in those caves. The real significance of these manuscripts is that they are much older than the previously discovered copies of the Old Testament. At the time, the oldest copy was the Aleppo Codex, dated to around the 10th century AD. These Dead Sea Scrolls were proven to be copies of the same work, but about 1,000 years older. The 1991 carbon-14 dating on pieces of the scrolls dated the manuscripts to about 200 years before the birth of Christ, and paleographic dating work conducted on these scrolls confirmed this date range. The Dead Sea Scrolls allow us to examine handwritten portions of the same book, copied by different people in different languages many miles apart from one another. When the scrolls were assembled and translated, they were compared to newer works like the Aleppo Codex to see how they differed or remained the same. When the text of the translated scrolls are compared to modern translations of these same biblical passages, most of the fragments are remarkably similar, and many of them are nearly identical. This illustrates how countless Jewish and Christian scribes have faithfully copied their religious text with little deviation for 1,000 years, and this begs the question, that if the books were preserved with little distortion from 200 BC to 920 AD, then is it much of a stretch to assume that if the same diligence was applied to the copying of biblical texts before the writing of the Dead Sea Scrolls, could these scrolls themselves be copies of books initially written in the 8th century BC, and be relatively free of distortion as well, just as the original Jewish and Christian lore suggests that the Holy Bible is? The Jews and Christians alike consider the Old Testament to be worth preserving for us, and they sacrifice countless hours of life and effort to the toil of hand-copying this over 700-page book. Now, with the help of one very carefully placed time capsule 2,000 years ago, we see how these efforts actually paid off. Despite lacking in all of our modern tools and technology, our ancestors preserved their stories for us to see today. Now, it's up to us to wield the torch in the great relay race of life. We have to decide what information we know that's worth saving for future generations, and what might not be. Because ultimately, just like our ancestors, we all end up unavailable for questioning.